So, good day everyone. Before I start po, we would like to apologize for the inconvenience since Renz Rosario cannot open his cam po because may problema po sa PC niya. Thank you for your understanding. So, good day everyone again. Today we will be presenting Module 9, which is the global demography. So when we talk about demography, we are really asking how do populations grow, move, and change over time? And more importantly, how do these movements affect our economy, our environment, and our future? So this topic is very important because we live in a world that is becoming more connected each day. Globalization has made it easier for people to move across borders, for populations to shift from rural to urban, and for cultures to influence one another. And at the same time, it has also created challenges, rapid population growth, migration pressures, and then environmental sustainability. So let's begin by introducing first the reporters for today's presentation. Renz Rosario, Dara Royo, and Angelique Bernadine Ruado. Now let's start with the topic movement and sustainability. So in today's presentation, we will examine the reasons why families have children, the differences between rural and urban families, global demographic patterns from the past decades, migration trends both within countries and internationally, and finally, the link between demography and sustainability. So at the end of this lesson, we should be able to do three things. First, explain the relationship between population and economic welfare. In other words, how does population size and growth affect the wealth, productivity, and quality of life in a society? Second, we will identify the interconnections among populations, migration, and sustainability. So this means we will explore how people moving from one place to another impacts resources, development, and the environment. And third, we will look at contrasting positions on reproductive health. Why do some groups or nations encourage having more children, while others promote family planning and smaller families? So keep these outcomes in mind as we move forward because each section of our discussions will connect back to these three main goals. So let's start with the most basic question. Why do families have children? When couples are asked this, their answers are almost always about feelings rather than economics. For many, a child symbolizes a successful marriage or union, and it's seen as a proof that love has borne fruit. So children also serves as carriers of the family legacy, and they ensure that the family name continues and the traditions and stories are passed on from one generation to the next. So this idea of kinship is very important in many cultures, especially in Asia and in rural communities. So from another perspective, children bring joy and completeness, whether it's through laughter, milestones like a baby's first step, or even the pride of sending a child to school. So parents often describe children as a source of happiness and fulfillment in life. So we can see here that children are more than just numbers in population statistics. They are symbols of love, continuity, and identity for families. So now let's move to the economic reasons. Beyond emotions, children can also be viewed as contributors to the family's financial and practical survival. In rural settings, especially farming communities, children are seen as additional labor. They help plant crops, harvest produce, tend animals, and do household chores. So the more children a family has, the more helping hands they can rely on during peak agricultural seasons. In some small family businesses, children also contribute. For instance, in a market stall or a family-owned shop, kids might help sell products or manage customers. Their participations adds economic value to the households. And there's also the idea of long-term support in many cultures, especially in developing countries. Children are considered the parents' retirement plan. They are expected to provide for their parents once they grow old, and so having more children can feel like a form of financial security for the future. So this shows us that aside from emotional reasons, children are often regarded as both immediate and long-term investment for families, especially in poorer or rural areas. So in rural communities, these economic reasons become more visible. Families often welcome an extra hand in the field because farming is labor intensive and seasonal. So think about harvest time. A large family means more people to help collect crops quickly, ensuring that food doesn't go to waste. In poorer districts, having many children is even seen as a survival strategy. So if one child gets sick or struggles, others can still contribute. And kinship is also a safety net because extended families like grandparents, cousins, uncles, and aunts work together to sustain farming or small scale businesses. In this sense, having children strengthens the family network and provides resilience against poverty and natural challenges like droughts or floods. So for rural families, children are not just dependents. They are active contributors to the family's livelihood and security. Next slide. So urban families, on the other hand, have very different perspective. In cities, parents often prefer to have only one or two children. So the main reason is cost. So raising a child in an urban environment is expensive. Parents need to pay for schooling, healthcare, housing, clothing, and many other necessities. So urban families also place a strong emphasis on quality rather than quantity. They would rather focus on resources on fewer children to give them the best possible education and opportunities for success. Unlike rural areas with extended kinship systems, urban families often live as a nuclear households, just the parents and their children. So this means they don't always have relatives nearby to share responsibilities. So having many children becomes more difficult to manage. Lastly, urban lifestyles are faster and more career driven because professional parents often balance work and family life. So having fewer children allows them to manage both responsibilities better. In short, while rural families see children as economic assets, urban families see them as financial responsibilities that require careful planning. So to summarize this part, rural and urban families have opposite approaches. Rural families see children as assets who directly contribute to survival and economic activity. So more children mean more labor and greater family security. Urban families, however, see children as responsibilities who require investment and resources. So fewer children mean better opportunities per child but also higher cost per individual. So these contrasting views explain why population growth rates are usually higher in rural areas compared to cities. They also set the stage for how different countries design their social and economic policies. Now let's move to how family life connects with national policy. The way families view children, whether as assets or responsibilities, doesn't just stay within households. It actually influences how governments design their economic and social strategies. For example, in developing countries where agriculture still dominates the economy, family tends to be larger. Government in these regions often create policies that indirectly support bigger families because more children mean more hands for farming and labor. So this ensures that agricultural production continues to meet the needs of society. So on the other hand, in developed countries where economies are more industrialized and service-oriented, the preference is for smaller families and governments in these nations often provide social welfare programs like pensions, and healthcare. So parents don't have to rely on having many children for support. They also promote family planning, education, and women's empowerment because smaller families aligns with their economic goals. So what we see here is that family choices are not isolated. They are closely tied to national priorities. The structure of families can directly shape a nation's policy on healthcare, education, labor, and even housing. So let's now look at historical population trends. According to a 1918 United Nations report, about 85% of the world's population at the time lived in developing regions, and the projection was that by at the end of the 20th century, that number would rise to around 90%. So what does this mean? It tells us that population growth was concentrated in poorer nations, not in developed ones. So this created a major imbalance. And imagine, the majority of people are living in countries with fewer resources, weaker economies, and less developed infrastructures. That puts huge pressure on food supplies, housing, education, and healthcare. And while agricultural production did increase during that time, it was not evenly distributed. In many developing countries, the rise in food production still couldn't keep pace with the rising demand from growing populations. So this created a vicious cycle. Rapid growth led to greater poverty, which in turn made it harder to manage resources effectively. So closely tied to population growth is agriculture. Yes, agricultural production. It grows in many parts of the world, but the problem was that it wasn't enough to balance out the rapid increase in population. Some regions produce plenty while others struggle with food shortages. So this is particularly visible in developing nations where farming methods remained traditional and technology was limited. So as population grew, the demand for food outpaced supply. The result, hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity. So it's important to remember that agriculture doesn't just feed people. It also provides jobs. So when population growth becomes too fast for agriculture to handle, it creates unemployment and underemployment. Too many workers, too little land and resources. So that is why many countries began looking at family planning policies as early as the 1980s. They realized that balancing population growth with food production was key to national stability. So between 1980 and 2011, we saw a major shift in global demographics. In 1980, the world population was about 2.2 billion, and by 2011, it had grown to about 2.6 billion. That's a significant jump in just 3 decades. So here's the interesting part. While the total population increased, the agricultural population share decreased. In other words, fewer people were working in agriculture compared to before. This points to rapid urbanization. People left the countryside and migrated to cities in search of better opportunities. Farming population shrunk while city populations exploded. So this shift wasn't just about numbers. It marked a change in lifestyle, culture, and economy, and cities became centers of opportunity but also centers of inequality and overcrowding. So urbanization is one of the most important demographic changes of our time. Now here's a common misconception. Some people think that the cities grow because urban families are having more children, but that's not really the case. Urban families often prefer fewer children, as we discussed earlier. Instead, urban growth is largely driven by migration. People move from rural to urban areas because of the push and pull factors. So the pull factors include job opportunities, access to a better education, modern healthcare, and higher wages. So the push factors are rural poverty, lack of land, and limited opportunities. So people are not necessarily being born in cities, they are moving into them because this explains why cities keep expanding while many rural areas are shrinking or aging. So migration has been accelerating since the 1950s. Industrialization created a huge demand for labor in cities. So people naturally gravitated toward them. So in developing countries, rural to urban migration has created new problems and cities have become overcrowded. Housing shortages led to the growth of slums and informal settlements. And with too many workers competing for too few jobs, unemployment and underemployment became the major issues. In developing countries or in developed countries, the situation is different. Migration often involves foreign workers moving in, either legally or illegally, to fill labor gaps. For instance, many developed nations rely on migrants for industries like construction, healthcare, and then services. So while migration provides opportunities for individuals, it also creates new challenges for governments, how to manage housing jobs, and resources for growing urban population. So beyond internal migration, international migration has also shaped global demography. Millions of people move abroad each year in search of better opportunities. So for many developing countries, this is a lifeline and the money that overseas workers send back home called remittances. It becomes a major of source of income for families and even for the national economy. For example, the Philippines is one of the largest recipients of remittances worldwide. However, this also comes with the downsides. One, is, one issue is the so-called brain drain, where highly skilled workers like doctors, nurses, and engineers leave their home countries for better opportunities abroad. This creates a shortage of talent back home. So on the flip side, developed countries benefit from a brain gain. They get skilled workers without having to invest in their training. Because of this dynamics, many developed nations have imposed stricter immigration policies to control the flow of migrants, and still the demand for labor keeps migration strong. This makes international migration one of the most significant forces shaping today's global population. Now let's connect demography and sustainability. As population grows, especially in cities, the pressure on the environment increases. Urbanization leads to more waste, higher levels of pollution, housing shortages, and traffic congestion. These problems are not just inconvenience, and, and they are directly affecting the quality of life and the sustainability of urban living. And then migration also affects sustainability when large numbers of people move into cities. Resources like water, energy, and land are stretched thin. If not managed properly, this can lead to serious environmental degradation. And sustainability is about finding balance. So meeting today's needs without compromising the needs of future generations. So governments have to carefully manage population growth, migration flows, and resource use to create sustainable cities and communities. So reproductive health is one of the most debated issues in demography. On one side, we have pronatalist views. So this encourage having more children, usually for cultural or economic reasons. Some countries with aging populations like Japan or Italy are even offering intensity incentives for families to have more children. So on the other side, we have an anti-natalist views. So this promotes smaller families, emphasizing quality of life over quantity. And then family planning programs, contraceptive use, and then women's empowerment are central to this perspective. So globally, this debate touches on sensitive issues, women's rights, access to healthcare, and the role of government in family decisions. The key here is balance. Reproductive health policies must consider cultural values, economic realities, and sustainability of national resources. Now let's summarize the main points of our discussion. First, families have children for both emotional and economic reasons. Second, rural and urban families view children very differently. Rural families see them as assets, while urban families see them as responsibilities. Third, global population growth has been concentrated in developing countries, creating challenges for foods, jobs, and then resources. Fourth, urbanization is driven more by migration than fertility. And then fifth, international migration reshapes both developing and developed nations with remittances, brain drain, and stricter immigration policies. And then finally, sustainability depends on how well we manage demographic pressures while protecting the environment. These lessons remind us that demography is not just about statistics. It's about the people and real policies. So to end, let me leave you with this reflection. Demography is not just about numbers. It's about people, choices, and sustainability. So the way populations grow, move, and adapt shapes the world we live in. Families make decisions based on love and survival. Governments design policies to balance growth and resources. And individuals migrate in search of better lives. So understanding these movements helps us see the bigger picture that every decision, whether personal or political, affects the sustainability of our future. Thank you very much for listening. That's all. And may I call on the next reporter to discuss to us the next topic.
Hello everyone, I'm Mario Rancis Rosario and sorry for not opening my cam, sir. So let's start with the perils of overpopulation. So the debate on growth. There's a debate on growth. So the development planners generally agree that urbanization and industrialization are important signs of modernization. However, there is strong disagreement on whether population growth supports development or slows down economic and social progress. So the next slide is about the Malthusian theory. So in 1798, Thomas Malthus argued that population tends to grow faster than food supply. He warned that if population growth is not controlled, it could result in famine, poverty, and depletion of natural resources. Next is the theory of the Ehrlich. It's the population bomb. In 1968, Paul and Anne Ehrlich revived Malthus' ideas in their book, The Population Bomb. They predicted widespread starvation and believed that zero population growth was necessary, proposing strict and controversial population control measures. Next slide is the population boom from 1955 to 1975. After World War II, many countries experienced rapid population growth, with global growth rates peaking in the late 1960s. This period increased concerns that economic resources would be stretched just to support basic needs. And the next one is the government responses. In response to rapid population growth, governments in countries such as the Philippines, China, and India implemented birth control programs. Some of these policies became coercive, including forced sterilization and strict birth limits. The continuing fears, even after decades of family planning programs, fear about overpopulation remains strong. Population growth continues to be framed as a major environmental threat, economic burden, and cause of social instability. Reproductive health and development. Over time, population control was reframed as reproductive health. This approach emphasized women's right to choose, access to modern contraceptives, and the role of family planning in supporting development. Politics and population control. Population policies were often shaped by political interests and stereotypes. Poor and marginalized groups were frequently blamed for overpopulation, which led to coercive and unethical population control practices. So here's the key takeaways. The debate on population growth is not just about numbers. It is a complex issue involving science, politics, economics, and morality, and it continues to influence development policies worldwide. It's the economy, not the babies. The criticism of population control. Critics such as Betsy Hartman argue that population control is not a real solution to poverty. She emphasizes that problems like inequality, unemployment, poor education, weak healthcare systems, and lack of social reform are the real causes of underdevelopment. Benefits of population growth. The population growth has also produced positive effects, including technological innovation, institutional reform, and economic expansion. Urban migration created challenges, but it also opened new opportunities for growth and development. Demographic dividend. A younger population can create a demographic dividend when there are more working age people than dependents. Productivity increases and incomes rises, and overall economic performance improves. So let's move forward to the East Asia's experience. East Asia experienced rapid economic growth due to declining fertility rates, lower infant mortality, and growing workforce. These factors played a major role in strengthening the region's economy. And then, human ingenuity and the Green Revolution, where population pressure encouraged innovation, leading to the Green Revolution. New farming techniques and high yield crops food uh, greatly increased food production and helped prevent global famine. And then the middle ground, the population debate lies between fear of overpopulation and criticism of population control. A balanced approach promotes inclusive growth, green economic development, and respect for human rights. So that's all for me. Let's call on Miss Angelique for the next slides.
So good day again, everyone. I am Angelique Bernardine Ruado, and now I'll be discussing the women and reproductive rights, focusing on how fertility, development, and global policies are interconnected. So this topic highlights why women control over reproductive decision is essential not only for personal well-being but also for national and global development. So, women's reproductive rights are central to population and economic debates worldwide. So, when women have autonomy over childbearing, they gain greater opportunities for economic, social, and political participation. So, this freedom allows women to plan their futures, contribute meaningfully to society, and support national economic growth. So fertility and economic prosperity are closely linked. Many high-income and fast-developing nations have achieved success by ensuring access to reproductive rights. In fact, about 73% of governments in North America and Europe allow abortion upon request, showing how reproductive autonomy supports stable families and strong economies. So education plays a vital role in improving women's lives. Educated women experience greater economic improvement because they can delay early childbearing and focus on higher education and careers. So this reduces the pressure on women to focus solely on childcare and enables them to participate actively in workforce. So on Voliba, it provides a clear example of how reproductive policies affect fertility. In 1960, the total fertility rate is 6.7 children per woman. So in 1978, family planning programs were introduced and abortion was legalized to reduce deaths from unsafe procedures. So by 1985, the fertility rate dropped to 5.13, and by 2008, it further declined to 3.46. So in Ghana, reproductive health laws were expanded due to concerns about maternal health. After these reforms, fertility rates declined sharply. So Ghana's experience became an example for other countries, showing how strong reproductive health policies can improve women's health and influence national development. So despite proven benefits, reproductive rights face strong opposition. Religious and conservative groups often associate these rights with abortion and view abortion as immoral or harmful. So as a result, restrictive reproductive policies exist in countries such as Poland, Croatia, Hungary, Russia, and others. So reproductive rights vary widely by region. In many Muslim majority countries, abortion is generally banned and women are encouraged to prioritize domestic roles. So in Senegal, abortion is allowed only if the mother's life is threatened. So in Philippines, reproductive health laws exist but are slowed by political resistance. The US shows a mix of pro-choice laws and strict state-level restrictions. So the United States demonstrate that industrialization does not guarantee reproductive rights. The women's movement of the 1960s secured pro-choice laws, but today conservative states continue to impose restrictions. So this shows that reproductive rights require continuous protection. So in conclusion, governments must ensure access to contraceptions and safe abortion, invest in women's education, and fund and enforce reproductive health laws. It is also important to guard against political rollback. Protecting women's reproductive rights is essential for sustainable development, economic growth, and social equality. So now I'll be moving on to the feminist perspective on reproductive rights. It focuses on women's autonomy, empowerment, and the policy challenges surrounding reproductive health. So feminist perspectives emphasizes that reproductive decisions should belong to women themselves and must be protected as fundamental human rights rather than tools for population management. So the feminist approach views reproductive issues primarily through a rights-based perspective. So instead of focusing on population targets or demographic goals, feminists emphasize women's autonomy, empowerment, and freedom of choice. So this approach argues that women should be able to decide if, when, and how many children to have without pressure, coercion, and punishment from the state or society. So feminists strongly oppose compulsory or punitive population control measures. So programs that rely on carrot and stick approaches, such as incentives for having fewer children or penalties for having more. So it is viewed as coercive rather than empowering. So feminists argue that these strategies often violate women's rights, undermine their agency, and place the burden of population management disproportionately on women. So from feminist perspective, population control arguments often overlook deeper structural problems. So these include the unequal distribution of wealth, the absence of universal social safety nets such as healthcare and education, and persistent gender inequality reinforced by exclusionary policies. So feminists argue that These system issues, not population size alone, are the real drivers of poverty and social instability. So feminists also challenge the idea that overpopulation by itself causes poverty or ecological devastation. So they argue that there is a limited strong evidence supporting this claim. Instead, they point to broader social, economic, and political factors such as poor governance, inequality, and lack of access to resources as the primary causes of underdevelopment and environmental harm. So the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, or the ICPD, marked a major milestone for feminist advocacy. So during this conference, the international community formally recognized the, the importance of right-based approaches to reproductive health. So country representatives agreed that family planning should be addressed women's right, health, and informed choice rather than population targets alone. So although feminist concerns were acknowledged at the ICPD, the implementation of its recommendations was left to individual countries. So as a result, international recognition did not automatically lead to consistent or uniform national policies. Different political systems, cultural norms, and priorities influence how or whether these commitments were put into practice. So translating feminist principles and the ICPD recommendations into actual programs remain challenging. Many countries face political resistance, cultural opposition, and limited budgets that restrict implementation. So these barriers continue to slow the progress, forcing feminist advocates to push for change at both national and local levels. So in conclusion, feminist arguments for reproductive rights are widely acknowledged at the global level. However, turning these ideas into effective and consistent public policy remains uneven and contested. Feminist movements continue to face the challenge of balancing strong rights-based advocacy with political realities as they work to protect and expand women's reproductive autonomy worldwide. So now we'll focus on the relationship between the population growth and food security. It highlights the major challenges and strategies needed to sustain the global population in the 21st century. So as the world population continues to increase, ensuring that everyone has access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food has become one of the most urgent global concerns. So today, the world population stands at approximately 7.4 billion people. According to projections, this number is expected to rise to 9.5 billion by the year 2050 and may reach as high as 11.2 billion by 21,000. So the global median age is about 30 years, with men averaging slightly younger than women. So these figures shows that the world still has a relatively young population that will continue to grow for decades. So global population growth is not evenly distributed. So while some countries are experiencing rapid increases, others are seeing little to no growth. Understanding these trends is important because population changes directly affect food demand, labor supply, and economic development worldwide. So around 95% of the future population growth is expected to occur in developing countries. Some nations are projected to triple their population, by the middle of the century. So, in contrast, many developed countries such as Japan and Singapore are experiencing stable or even declining populations. So, this imbalance creates challenges in food distribution and economic stability. So, although population growth will continue, experts do not expect it to spiral out of control. So, the global population is projected to stabilize at around 9 billion by 2050. So, however, the primary concern is not the number of people alone, but how to feed the growing population in a sustainable and equitable way. So, declining fertility rates and a younger workforce do not automatically guarantee food security. The Food and Agriculture Organization warns that global food production must increase in about 70% to meet future demand. So this includes increasing cereal production from 2.1 billion to 3 billion tons and raising meat production from 200 million to 470 million tons annually. So however, cereal growth rates have slowed significantly over time, making this goal more difficult to achieve. So to address food security challenges, the FAO recommends increasing investment in agriculture and developing long-term policies to reduce poverty. Investment in research and development is also essential, and in addition, governments should strengthen social services such as food assistance, healthcare, and education, especially for poor and vulnerable populations. So domestic food production alone may not be enough to feed growing populations, making food imports essential for many countries. Governments are encouraged to keep markets open, support fair and competitive global trade systems, and ensure reliable food markets. Global cooperation is crucial to maintaining food availability and price stability. So despite clear recommendations, implementation remains difficult. Achieving food security requires strong political will and good governance. Large-scale reforms in population and food policies take time, and developing nations often face greater challenges due to limited resources and infrastructure. So feeding nearly 9 to 11 billion people will require a 70% increase in food production. Population growth will mainly occur in developing countries where resources are already strained. Success depends on sustained agricultural investment, effective policy reforms, international cooperation, and strong governance systems. So demography is the study of population trends using social science data, and it influences the environment, politics, resources, and policy making. Population studies are not just about numbers, but about people and their quality of life. Globalization cannot be complete without considering population, movement, and human development. So this presentation is supported by sources from the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, academic journals, and demographic studies that examine population growth, food security, and global development. So the following slides will explain how global demography and globalization are connected, and population patterns around the world are influenced by global economic forces, social change, and labor opportunities. So these factors shape how people live, work, and move across countries. So for economic factors such as income, jobs, and social change strongly affect population patterns. In poorer areas, large families are often seen as an economic advantage, while urban and educated families prefer smaller families due to higher cost and career priorities. So migration to cities or other countries happen as people search for better work. The Malthusian debate shows differing views on whether limiting population helps development or if growth drives innovation. Reproductive rights also allow women to join the workforce, supporting economic growth.
Thank you, Angelique, for the thank you, Angelique, for the for the explaining the last slide. So let's move on to political process. This explains how population issues are closely connected to politics and state power. Governments create population policies to manage growth, as seen in countries like the Philippines, China, and India. Migration also affects state authority. While migrants help fill labor shortages, they can increase political pressure for stricter immigration policies. Reproductive health is another political issue. Laws on contraception and abortion show the tension between government control and individual rights. Lastly, international organizations like the UN and FAO promote cooperation to address global population issues such as poverty and food security. So, I'm passing now the floor to Ms. Dara.
So in this slide, it focuses on how culture influences population trends. Religious beliefs and gender roles strongly shape family size and reproductive choices. Large families are often valued for culture and economic reasons, especially in rural areas. And however, feminist and religious perspectives often clash, while conservative views restrict reproductive rights, and then feminist perspectives emphasizes women's empowerment and the right to control fertility for equality and social progress. So this shows that population dynamics are shaped by globalization, not just biological or local factors. And the population debate reflects economic, political, and cultural tensions. So in proper countries, children are often seen as assets, while in wealthier countries, they are viewed as financial responsibilities. So populations issues are also politicized and then influencing policies on immigration and reproduction. And then real progress comes from addressing inequality, education, and healthcare, not population control alone. So in summary, population issues are shaped by politics, culture, and globalization. So understanding these factors help promote fair and people-centered population policies. So that's all for our report. Thank you for listening.